Most people think small towns feel safe. Quiet streets, familiar houses. But in some places, that quiet feels deliberate, like the town itself is waiting for something to notice it. This is Vesper Shroud, and these are 10 true horror stories from small towns in Pennsylvania. Stories they never explained, and never truly escaped. Story 1. Street in Pennsylvania that went silent. I still remember the exact moment I realized something was wrong with Mercer Street. It was the silence. Not the peaceful kind you welcome after a long day, but the kind that presses against your eardrums like water at the bottom of a deep pool. The kind that makes you understand why they say silence can be deafening. I moved to Millbrook, Pennsylvania 3 months ago. Population 2,000 and change. The kind of forgotten place where everyone knows your name by the second week. Where the diner serves the same meatloaf special every Thursday. And where nothing ever happens. That last part turned out to be a lie. Mercer Street runs through the oldest part of town. 12 houses, all built in the 1800s, standing like crooked teeth along a road that time forgot. I rented the corner house because the price was right and because I needed to disappear for a while. Bad divorce. Worst decisions. Pennsylvania seemed as good a place as any to start over. The first 2 months were normal. I heard Mrs. Henderson, whose wind chimes 3 houses down. Kids rode bikes past my window every afternoon around 4. Dogs barked. Cars drove by. Life happened the way it always does on small-town streets across America. Then, on a Tuesday in October, everything stopped. I woke up that morning and immediately felt it. The air had changed. I stood in my kitchen, coffee cup halfway to my lips, trying to understand what was different. Then it hit me. No sound. No birds. No distant traffic from the highway 2 miles out. No wind chimes. Nothing. I stepped onto my porch. The morning was gray, typical for Pennsylvania autumn, with fog clinging to the ground like it had nowhere else to go. The street looked normal. Houses stood where they always stood. Cars sat in driveways, but the rawness was everywhere, thick as the fog itself. I walked to the edge of my property. Still nothing. The silence was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat, the blood rushing through my ears. I called out, "Hello." My voice sounded flat, dead, like it hit an invisible wall 5 feet from my mouth and just stopped. No echo, no response, just that horrible, pressing quiet. I told myself it was early. People were sleeping. Reasonable explanation. But it was 7:30 on a Tuesday morning. Mrs. Henderson should have been on her porch. The Kowalski kids should have been waiting for the school bus. Tom Brennan should have been backing his pickup truck out of his driveway for his construction job. But Mercer Street was empty. And silent. And wrong. I went back inside, checked my phone. No service. Internet was down too. I turned on the television. Static on every channel. Radio. More static. The power was working. Lights came on. The refrigerator hummed. But nothing could connect to the outside world. 3 hours passed. I spent them looking out my window, watching the street. No one emerged from their houses. No cars drove by. The fog never lifted. And that suffocating silence never broke. By noon, I made a decision. I had to check on my neighbors. The fear was growing inside me now, cold and heavy in my stomach. Something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. I walked to Mrs. Henderson's house first. Her wind chimes hung motionless despite a breeze I could feel on my skin. I knocked. The sound seemed to vanish the moment it left the door. I knocked harder. Nothing. I tried the handle. Locked. I peered through the window. Everything looked normal inside. A half-finished cup of tea on the kitchen table. Reading glasses next to an open book. But no Mrs. Henderson. The Kowalski house was the same. Normal. Empty. Silent. So was the Brennan place. And the Hutchinsons. And the Reeds. Every house on Mercer Street looked lived in but abandoned. Like everyone had simply vanished mid-morning, leaving everything behind. By the time I reached the 6th house, my hands were shaking. The fear had evolved into something darker. Terror, because I was starting to understand that whatever had happened, I was alone in it. Alone on this street that had somehow been cut off from the rest of the world. I walked to the end of Mercer Street where it connected to Oak Avenue. That is when I saw it. The barrier was invisible but absolute. I walked forward and hit something I couldn't. You see, not a wall exactly, more like the air itself had solidified. I pushed against it. The pressure pushed back. I could see Oak Avenue on the other side. Could see a car drive past. Could see a woman walking her dog. But I couldn't hear any of it. And when I shouted and waved, she didn't react at all. I was inside something. A bubble. A pocket. Mercer Street had been separated from reality. I spent the rest of the day testing the barrier. It ran the length of the street, curved around the back of the properties, created a perfect dome over everything. I threw rocks at it. They bounced off. I tried to dig under it. My shovel hit the same invisible resistance 6 inches down. Night came. The streetlights should have turned on automatically. They didn't. The houses stayed dark. My house was the only one with lights, and even those seemed dimmer than before, like the electricity itself was dying. I sat on my porch in the darkness, listening to nothing. The silence was maddening now. I started humming just to hear something, anything. But even my humming sounded wrong. Muffled, dead. That's when I noticed the fog was back, thicker than before, rolling down Mercer Street like a living thing. And inside the fog, I saw movement. Shapes, human-shaped but wrong. They moved in jerks and stutters, like old film footage. Dozens of them, walking up and down the street, in and out of houses, through yards, always silent, always just barely visible through the gray. I ran inside, locked every door and window, turned off all the lights and hid in my bedroom closet like a terrified child. I could hear them now. Not footsteps exactly, more like the memory of footsteps, an echo of sound that had no source. The shapes came to my house. I heard my porch boards creak, my doorknob rattle. Something scratched at my windows. The sounds were faint, distant, like listening to someone else's nightmare from another room. Hours passed. Maybe. Time felt strange now, stretched out and compressed at the same time. My watch had stopped at noon. My phone was dead. There was no way to measure how long I sat in that closet, hardly breathing, listening to those things move through my house. When I finally opened the closet door, it was day again. Or something like day. The light coming through my windows was gray and flat. No sun, no shadows, just uniform grayness that could have been dawn or dusk or neither. I looked out my window. The fog was gone. The shapes were gone. But Mercer Street had changed. The houses looked older, paint more faded, roofs sagging, windows dirty, like years had passed overnight. My own hands looked different too. Older, thinner. I touched my face and felt new lines I didn't remember having. I ran to the bathroom mirror. The man looking back at me was me, but aged. Not dramatically, just enough to notice. 5 years worth of aging in one night. That is when I understood. We weren't just cut off from the world. We were unstuck from time itself. I went back outside, stood in the middle of Mercer Street, and I screamed until my throat was raw and my voice gave out. The sound went nowhere, died in that horrible silence. But then I heard something. Faint, distant, a voice. Help me. It came from the Kowalski house. I ran toward it, burst through the front door. The interior was dark and smelled wrong. Old, decayed. Hello, I called out. Upstairs, the voice answered. A woman's voice. Mrs. Kowalski. I climbed the stairs. Each step felt heavier than the last. The air grew thicker. At the top, I found her. Mrs. Kowalski sat in the corner of her bedroom, but she was transparent. I could see through her to the wall behind. And she was old, ancient, skin hanging off bones, eyes sunken deep in her skull. How long? She whispered. How long what? How long have we been here? I didn't have an answer. Time had no meaning anymore. She reached out a skeletal hand toward me. It took them first, my husband, my children, one by one. The street took them, fed on them. Now it's taking me. Soon it will take you too. What is it? I asked. What is doing this? She smiled. It was horrible. The street remembered. Something happened here. Long ago. Something bad. The street remembered, and it's been hungry ever since. Waiting. We just happened to be here when it woke up. Mrs. Kowalski faded as I watched. Her transparency became total. Then she was gone. Just gone. Like she never existed at all. I backed out of the house. Ran to my own place. Locked myself inside again. But I knew it was pointless. You can lock out something that is already everywhere. Something that is the ground beneath your feet and the air you breathe. That night, the shapes came back. More of them now. And I recognized faces. Mr. Henderson, Tom Brennan, the Kowalski kids, all the neighbors who vanished. They moved through the fog, jerking and stuttering, trapped in their own silent horror. They came to my windows, pressed their faces against the glass. Their eyes were empty holes. Their mouths moved, but no sound came out. They were trying to warn me. I knew that, but I couldn't hear them. The silence wouldn't let me. I am writing this now because I can feel it happening. The street is taking me. My body feels lighter. When I look at my hands, I can see through them. Just a little, but it is starting. Time moves differently here. Do you know how long I've actually been trapped on Mercer Street? Days? Months? Years? My watch still says noon. My calendar still says October. but I feel centuries pressing down on me. The street feeds on time, on life, on the moments we thought we had. It's hungry, always hungry. And once it catches you in its silence, you re-part of it forever. A shadow in the fog, an echo of a person who used to exist. I try to escape. Every day I try, but the barrier never breaks. The silence never lifts. And slowly, inevitably, I'm fading. Sometimes I think I hear things from the outside world. Cars, voices, life continuing without me, but they so distant now, like listening to the living from the bottom of a grave. If you, re-listening to this, stay away from Millbrook, Pennsylvania. Stay away from Mercer Street, because it is still there, still silent, still hungry, and it is waiting for the next person who needs a cheap place to rent. The next person who needs to disappear for a while. Be careful what you wish for, because on Mercer Street, disappearing is exactly what you'll get. I can see through my entire body now. The fog is inside my house. The shapes are gathering. They reaching for me with hands that aren't quite there. And I'm so tired of the silence, so tired of this terrifying, endless quiet. Maybe when I am finally gone, I'll be able to make sound again. Maybe I'll be able to scream, or maybe I'll just be another shadow in the fog. Another warning that no one can hear. The street is taking me now. I can feel it pulling me apart, spreading me thin across all the moments it is collected. All the time it is stolen. Mercer Street went silent. And now I understand why. Because the silence I ascend to empty. It is full of screams that no one can hear. What happened next did not feel connected at first. Different town, different place, but the same unsettling sense that something ordinary had quietly shifted out of place. Story 2. House at the edge of the town. I can still feel it watching me. Even now, months later, sitting in my apartment with all the lights on, I can feel its presence. That terrifying, creeping sensation that something unseen is focused entirely on me, waiting, learning, hungry. You might think I'm crazy. Most people do. But I need to tell you what happened because it is still out there, and it might be closer than you think. Let me start with the house. It sat at the very edge of Blackwell, Pennsylvania, a dying town in the Rust Belt that most people drive through without noticing. Population 3,000, give or take. A town where nothing frightening ever happens, where the biggest scandal was old Mr. Henderson, his barn fire in '94. I grew up there. I knew every street, every building, every shadow that fell across Main Street at sunset. But that house at the edge of town, the old Kepler property, that was different. That was a place that felt wrong even before everything started. I moved back home after my divorce. Needed time, needed space, needed to figure out who I was when the life I had built for 12 years crumbled into nothing. My parents offered me their guest room, but I wanted my independence, so I rented a small cottage 3 blocks from my childhood home. Quiet neighborhood, safe neighborhood, or so I thought. The house that would become the source of my nightmare sat exactly 147 yards down Marvin Street. I measured it later, needing to know the precise distance. The Kepler house had been empty for almost 7 years. That's what my mother told me when I mentioned it during our first dinner back. She said it had belonged to an old woman who died, and her family never came to claim it. The roof was sagging, the paint peeled in long gray strips. Most of the windows were covered with plywood, giving it the appearance of a corpse with its eyes closed. But here, the thing about that creepy, haunted structure, it was visible from my bedroom window. I didn't think much about it at first. It was just an eyesore, a reminder of the decay that had claimed so much of Blackwell. I draw the curtains before bed and forget about it. But around the 3rd week of living there, something shifted. Something unsettling crawled into my consciousness and wouldn't leave. I started noticing the details. The way the shadows around the house seemed darker than they should be, even on bright afternoons. The peculiar silence that surrounded it, as if the normal sounds of the town, the birds, the wind through the trees, everything avoided that place. And then there were the nights when I did wake up at exactly 3 in the morning, my heart pounding, my skin covered in cold sweat, with the absolute certainty that I had been watched while I slept. I told myself I was being paranoid. The divorce had left me broken in ways I didn't fully understand. I was projecting my anxiety onto an abandoned house. It was psychology, not anything supernatural or genuinely terrifying. Except the feeling never went away. It only grew stronger. By the fourth week, I started keeping a journal. I documented every moment the house occupied my thoughts. Every time I felt that disturbing, haunting sensation. Every night I woke in the darkness with goosebumps covering my arms. By the fifth week, I had filled 16 pages. The handwriting became more frantic toward the end. Then came the night I saw the light. It was a Thursday, 3 in the morning, as always. I'd woken again with that eerie, nightmare-inducing feeling, that bone-deep knowledge that something was aware of me. I lay in bed, trying to control my breathing, trying to convince myself this was all in my head. That is when I saw it. A pale, sickly yellow glow coming from one of the windows on the second floor of the Kepler house. Not the broken windows covered in plywood. A different one that had been dark and lifeless just hours before. I should have called someone. I should have contacted the police, reported a possible trespasser, done something rational and sensible. Instead, I found myself drawn to the window, my face pressed against the cold glass, staring at that horrifying light. It didn't flicker like a flashlight. It didn't move like a candle flame. It simply was, stationary and unwavering, like an eye-opening in the darkness. I watched it for hours. The light never changed. The house never made a sound. But I felt it then, more intensely than ever before. That terrifying certainty that something inside that decrepit, abandoned structure was aware of my presence. That it knew I was watching. And worse, that it was satisfied I was watching. The light vanished just before dawn. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on my couch with every light in the cottage burning, drinking cold coffee, trying to think rationally about what I'd seen. By morning, I convinced myself that I imagined the entire thing. A trick of the tired mind. Stress manifesting as supernatural fear. But I also knew, with a dreadful certainty, that I was lying to myself. The next day, I drove to the county assessor's office in downtown Blackwell and requested everything on file about the Kepler property. The woman at the desk, a pleasant woman named Susan who had been 2 grades ahead of me in high school, barely blinked at my request. She pulled microfiche records from a filing cabinet and spent an hour helping me understand the history of the house. It was built in 1952, originally a family home, typical post-war construction. The Keplers had owned it for 43 years. But there were gaps in the records, years where property taxes weren't listed, inconsistencies in the documentation. When I asked Susan about it, she laughed nervously and said sometimes records just got lost. Nothing sinister about it, just bureaucracy. But I could see the discomfort in her eyes. She knew something, or suspected something. Either way, she didn't want to talk about it. I spent that afternoon in the Blackwell Library, digging through old newspaper archives on the library's ancient computer system. The local paper, the Blackwell Gazette, had been reporting on the town for over 100 years. I searched for any mention of the Kepler house, the Kepler family, anything that might explain the eerie, unsettling feeling that place generated. What I found made my blood run cold. In 1987, the Gazette ran a small article about a missing persons case. Thomas Kepler, age 12, had vanished from his home. The article was brief, almost dismissive. The boy, his parents reported him missing. Police conducted a search. He was never found. The story disappeared from the papers within a week, replaced by more pressing local news. But I noticed something. The article mentioned that Thomas had been seen talking to himself in the weeks before his disappearance. That neighbors reported hearing strange sounds coming from the basement of the house. That the boy, his mother had taken him to see a psychiatrist. 2 years later, another article. A girl named Rebecca Marsh, age 14, had disappeared from the bus stop near Marvin Street. Last seen walking toward the edge of town, not directly connected to the Kepler house in the article, but the location felt significant. Rebecca was found 3 days later in a state of severe dehydration and psychological distress. She refused to say where she'd been or what had happened to her. The article noted that she spent 2 weeks in a psychiatric facility after her recovery. When she was released, her family moved away. I found 7 more articles like these, children and young adults, all connected in some way to that area of town. All of them having experienced something terrifying. All of them leaving Blackwell as soon as they possibly could. And through all of it, the Kepler house sat at the edge of the town, patient and waiting. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my cottage with my laptop, reading and rereading everything I discovered. The pattern was clear to me now, though I couldn't explain it logically. There was something in that house, something that attracted people, something that terrified them into silence. Around 2 in the morning, I heard a sound outside. It was subtle, barely audible over the hum of my computer fan, but unmistakable once I noticed it. A rhythmic tapping on the wood of the cottage, this exterior. Not violent, not aggressive, patient, like someone or something was gently, methodically testing the boundaries of my home. The sound moved around the cottage, circling it slowly. I sat frozen, every muscle tense, every nerve screaming at me to do something. The tapping stopped at my bedroom window. For 5 minutes, nothing. Then the sound resumed, but this time accompanied by something worse. A scratching sound, long, deliberate scrapes across the glass, as if something with very long fingernails was trying to get inside. I forced myself to move, stumbling toward the window, my hands shaking so violently I could barely grasp the curtain. I pulled it open. Nothing was there. The yard was empty. The night was still and quiet. But in that moment, I felt it with an intensity that nearly drove me to my knees. That horrible, bone-chilling certainty that I was being watched. That something was aware of me in a way that transcended normal human perception. That whatever was in the Kepler house had noticed my research, had noticed my interest, and had decided to make its awareness known. I did something desperate that night. I drove to the nearest city, 40 minutes away, and checked into a hotel. I paid cash. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. For 2 days, I stayed in that anonymous hotel room, trying to convince myself that I experienced a mental breakdown, that the stress of my divorce had finally cracked something fundamental in my psyche. But I couldn't stay away forever. On the 3rd day, I returned to Blackwell. I told myself it was because I had obligations. I had a job interview scheduled. I had to face my fear eventually. The truth was darker and more unsettling than that. I realized, with a horrifying clarity, that whatever was happening, whatever was in that house at the edge of town, it had established a connection with me. And running wasn't going to break that chilling, terrifying link. So I did something insane. I drove straight to the Kepler house. It was late afternoon, golden hour, the kind of beautiful autumn day that seems to mock the horror of what was happening in my life. The house looked exactly as it always had, broken and decrepit and utterly lifeless. The plywood-covered windows stared down at me like blank eyes. But I could feel it now, that presence, that awareness. It was close, very close. I walked around the perimeter of the property, looking for any sign of habitation, any indication that someone or something was using the house. What I found made my skin crawl. The back door, which according to the property records should have been sealed, was slightly ajar. And around the edges of that opening, there were scratch marks. Fresh ones, as if something had been trying to expand that gap, working slowly and methodically to create an entrance large enough to fit through. I didn't go inside. I'm not sure what I was terrified of finding in there, but every instinct screamed that crossing that threshold would be a fatal mistake. Instead, I stood there for a long time, staring at that dark, terrifying gap, feeling the pull of something inside the house. Something that was aware of me, something that wanted me to come inside. I turned and walked away, and as I did, I heard it, the sound of the back door creaking open a little wider, the scrape of something moving across the threshold, the sense of presence shifting, following me, watching my departure with an intensity that made my entire body vibrate with fear. I didn't look back. That was 6 months ago. I moved out of Blackwell 3 weeks later. I told my family I'd gotten a job offer in Ohio. I didn't tell them the truth. I haven't told anyone the truth until now. I still have the nightmares. I still wake up at 3 in the morning, that precise time, with the absolute certainty that something is watching me through my bedroom window. And sometimes, on those nights, I'll see it. A pale, sickly yellow light, not in my window, in the darkness beyond. As if whatever is in that house has extended its reach. As if the distance between us doesn't matter anymore. I researched the house obsessively for a while, trying to understand what it was. I found old occult references, articles about the thin places in the world, where the boundary between our reality and something else grows dangerously fragile. I found accounts from paranormal investigators who'd written about the Kepler house years ago, accounts that were buried on obscure websites and forgotten forums. They all said the same thing: the house is aware. It is alive in a way that defies explanation. And once it notices you, once it becomes interested in you, it never lets go. I moved apartments last month. I was hoping distance might help. It didn't. The feeling persists, the sense of being watched, studied, marked by something that exists on the other side of understanding. But here is the truly terrifying part. Here is what keeps me awake on those nights when I wake at 3 and feel that horrifying presence. I can feel it getting closer. Not physically, spiritually, mentally, whatever that house is, whatever entity or force resides at the edge of Blackwell, Pennsylvania. It has established a connection with me that grows stronger every single day. And I am beginning to understand, with a dread that goes beyond words, that it's not trying to hurt me. It's trying to bring me home. The house at the edge of the town is waiting. It is patient. It is eternal. And somewhere in another part of the country, someone else is probably noticing a strange property in their neighborhood. A decrepit building that feels wrong. A place where shadows dawn to behave quite right. A location that seems to pull at their consciousness in ways they can to explain. The house at the edge of town is many places. It is in every town. It is always waiting. And if you ever find yourself staring at a property that feels unsettling, that makes your skin crawl. That seems to be watching you even though there is no sign of life or movement. Remember this story. Remember that some places choose their residents. And once they do, you can run to the other side of the country. You can ignore it. You can try to convince yourself it was all in your head. But at 3 in the morning, when you wake with your heart pounding, when you feel that chilling certainty that something is aware of you, when you see that sickly yellow light in the darkness beyond your window, you will know the truth. You will know that it found you, and it's never going to let you go. Story 3. Night the town had no lights. I need you to understand something before I tell you what happened in Millbrook, Pennsylvania. Darkness is not just the absence of light. Real darkness, the kind that should not exist in this world, has weight. It has texture. And once you have felt it press against your skin, once you have breathed it into your lungs, you will never trust the night again. It started on a Tuesday in October, the kind of evening where the sun sets early and the cold creeps in with an edge that cuts through your jacket. I had been driving for 6 hours straight, pushing through exhaustion because I wanted to reach my sister's place before midnight. The highway stretched endlessly through rural Pennsylvania, past forgotten farms and dead factories, the kind of scenery that makes you feel like civilization is just a thin layer painted over something much older and darker. My GPS died somewhere near the state line. The screen flickered twice, showed a map that made no sense, streets that twisted into impossible shapes, and then went black. My phone had no signal. Not even one bar, just that terrifying emptiness that modern people fear more than anything. The sudden realization that you are completely disconnected from the world. That is when I saw the sign for Millbrook, population 812. The numbers looked freshly painted, but the wooden post leaned at an angle that suggested decades of neglect. I needed gas. My tank was nearly empty, and the next town on the map was another 40 miles. So I turned onto the exit ramp, following a narrow road that wound between hills covered in trees so thick they looked like walls of shadow. The town appeared suddenly, as if it had been hiding just beyond a curve in the road. Small houses lined both sides of Main Street, their windows glowing with warm yellow light. A gas station sat at the edge of town, its ancient pumps standing like sentinels under flickering fluorescent tubes. I pulled in, grateful and relieved, already imagining the hot coffee I would buy inside. But when I stepped out of my car, something felt wrong. The air was too still. No wind. No sounds of insects or distant traffic or dogs barking. Just silence so complete it felt unnatural, disturbing in a way I could not quite explain. The kind of quiet that makes your ears ring and your heart beat faster. I filled my tank, watching the numbers climb on the old mechanical pump. And that is when the lights went out. Not slowly, not with a flicker or a warning. Every light in Millbrook died in the same instant. The gas station, the houses, the street lamps. Everything vanished into blackness so absolute it felt like someone had thrown a hood over my head. I froze, my hand still on the pump, trying to process what had just happened. Power outages are normal. Every town experiences them, but this was different. This darkness was wrong. It was too thick, too heavy. I could not see my hand in front of my face, could not see the glow of my car, whose dashboard just 5 feet away. Could not see anything at all. And then I started to notice the sounds. Footsteps. Slow and deliberate, moving along the sidewalk across the street. But these were not the sounds of shoes on concrete. They were wet, like something dragging itself through mud. Multiple sets of them, coming from different directions, all moving with the same unhurried pace. I reached for my phone, my fingers shaking so badly I almost dropped it. The screen lit up, casting a tiny circle of blue light around me. Still no signal, but at least I could see. I pointed it toward Main Street, and what I saw made every muscle in my body lock up with fear. The houses were not empty. Figures stood in the windows, dozens of them, perfectly still, their faces pressed against the glass. But these were not normal people. Even from a distance, even in the weak glow of my phone, I could see that something was terribly wrong with them. Their proportions were off, their limbs too long, their heads tilted at angles that should have broken their necks. They were all watching me. I ran back to my car, fumbling with the door handle, my breath coming in short gasps. The footsteps grew louder, closer, that horrible wet dragging sound circling around me. I threw myself into the driver's seat and slammed the door, hitting the lock button over and over even though it only needed to be pressed once. My headlights cut through the darkness when I started the engine, and I wished to God they had not. Because what they revealed on Main Street was so disturbing, so fundamentally wrong, that my mind tried to reject it, tried to convince me I was seeing things that could not possibly be real. The people of Millbrook were outside now, standing in the street, blocking my way. There must have been 50 of them, maybe more, arranged in neat rows like soldiers at attention. They wore normal clothes, jeans and sweaters and jackets, the kind of everyday outfits you would see at any grocery store or gas station. But their faces were blank, smooth, as if someone had erased all their features and left behind only skin stretched over bone. No eyes, no mouths, no noses, just flesh the color of old paper, creased and folded in ways that suggested there was nothing underneath, that these things were hollow. I threw the car into reverse, tires screaming as I backed away from the gas pumps. The figures did not move, did not react at all. They simply stood there, facing me. Dozens of featureless heads tracking my movement with a precision that proved they could see me even without eyes. That is when I noticed the houses again. In the sweep of my headlights, I caught a glimpse of the buildings lining Main Street, and I realized why everything had felt so wrong from the moment I arrived. The houses were facades, just fronts, like stage props in a theater. Behind those windows, behind those walls, there was nothing. No rooms, no furniture, no depth at all. The entire town was a shell, a hollow construction designed to look real from the road but concealing only emptiness behind its painted surfaces. Millbrook was not a town. It was a trap, and I had driven straight into it. I spun the wheel and accelerated back toward the main road, but the street in front of me was different now. The pavement had changed. Where there should have been a clear path leading to the highway, I saw only a maze of narrow alleys and dead ends, all of them lined with those terrible blank figures. The town was rearranging itself, shifting like a puzzle box, trapping me inside its borders. My headlights caught something else then. A sign on the side of a building. Wooden, hand-painted, the letters crude but legible. You should not have stopped. Fear turned into panic, panic into pure terror. I drove faster, taking turns at random, searching desperately for any way out. But every street led back to Main Street. Every alley ended at the same gas station where I had made my horrible mistake. The town was a loop, a closed circle designed to keep things in, not out. The faceless people appeared on every corner now, emerging from doorways and alleys, their movements synchronized in a way that suggested a single controlling intelligence. They did not run or chase. They simply appeared wherever I was going, waiting with that patient stillness that was somehow more terrifying than any pursuit. I noticed something else too. Details that had not been visible before the power went out. Symbols carved into the pavement, geometric patterns that hurt to look at, that made my eyes water and my head throb. Chains hanging from lampposts, old and rusted, with hooks at the ends. And everywhere, scratched into walls and sidewalks and street signs, the same message repeated over and over: we feed on the lost. That is when I understood. This was not random. This was not some bizarre accident or supernatural phenomenon. This was intentional. Millbrook was a feeding ground, a carefully constructed hunting zone designed to catch travelers who made the mistake of stopping in a town that should not exist on any map. My phone buzzed. Impossible. There was no signal, but the screen showed a text message from an unknown number. Turn off your lights. I did not question it, did not hesitate. I killed the headlights and the engine, plunging myself into that awful darkness once more. And in the silence that followed, I heard them, the faceless things. They were making sounds now, low clicking noises like insects communicating, moving past my car so close I could hear their wet footsteps squelching on the pavement just inches from my door. Minutes passed, hours maybe. Time felt broken in that darkness, stretched and twisted until I could not tell if I had been sitting there for seconds or days. The clicking sounds faded, the footsteps retreated, and slowly, gradually, light began to return. Not electric light. This was dawn, the sun rising behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of gray and pink. And as the darkness lifted, Millbrook began to change. The facades melted away like ice under heat. The streets straightened. The impossible geometry that had trapped me resolved itself into normal roads and intersections. When full daylight arrived, I was sitting in my car on the shoulder of the highway, half a mile past the exit I had taken the night before. There was no town, no gas station, no main street lined with hollow buildings, just empty fields and trees and the distant sound of traffic on the interstate. But when I checked my gas gauge, it was full, and on my passenger seat, placed carefully as if by invisible hands, was a handwritten note on old paper. Thank you for not looking. I drove away, did not stop, did not look back, made it to my sister's house just before noon and told her nothing. Because how do you explain something like that? How do you make someone understand that there are places in this country that are not really places at all? That there are towns that exist only in darkness, feeding on the lost and the desperate and the unlucky? I looked up Millbrook later, searched every database, every map, every historical record I could find. There was a town by that name once, in Pennsylvania, back in the 1800s. Population 812. But it was abandoned after a mining accident in 1873. The entire town vanished overnight. Not destroyed, not evacuated, just gone, as if every person living there had simply walked away and never came back. The records say the mine collapsed. That poisonous gas killed everyone underground. But there is another story, one that exists only in fragments scattered across obscure websites and forgotten forums. It says the miners found something in the deep places beneath the earth. Something old, something that had been waiting in the darkness for a very long time. It says the town made a deal. Safety in exchange for service. Protection in exchange for prey. And when the mine was finally sealed, when the authorities came to investigate, they found only empty buildings and streets covered in symbols that made no sense. I think about that night constantly. About the text message that saved me. About the note on my seat. Someone or something in that place wanted me to survive. Wanted me to tell this story. And that terrifies me more than anything else. Because it means Millbrook is still out there. Still waiting on some dark road for the next person who makes the mistake of stopping. It means the town that should not exist is hunting. And it is patient. And it knows that eventually someone else will see that sign, will need gas or directions or just a place to rest. Someone else will turn onto that narrow road and find themselves trapped in darkness that has weight and texture and hunger. I still drive at night sometimes. Still take long trips across empty highways through rural Pennsylvania. But I never stop in small towns anymore. Never trust a place that appears too suddenly, too conveniently. And when the sun sets and the shadows grow long, I keep my tank full and my doors locked and my eyes fixed straight ahead. Because I know what waits in the darkness between towns. I know what feeds on the lost. And I know that someday, when my luck runs out or my attention fails, I might see that sign again. Population 812. Freshly painted numbers on a leaning wooden post. And next time, I might not be so lucky. Next time, the town might not let me leave at all. By this point, it was clear these moments were not isolated. They followed a pattern, not in what happened, but in how each place felt afterward. Story 4. Last shift. I never believed in the things people whispered about in Pennsylvania. It's forgotten coal towns until I worked the graveyard shift at the Clearview Diner off Route 22. That was 3 months ago, and I still wake up every night at exactly 3:15, drenched in cold sweat, hearing that sound. My name is David, and I need to tell someone what happened before I lose my mind completely. This isn't some creepy campfire tale. This is real. This happened to me. The diner sat at the edge of Millerton, one of those dying towns where the coal ran out decades ago and most folks just left. Population sign said 412, but I doubt even half that many people actually live there anymore. The place had that eerie, abandoned feeling even during the day. Boarded up storefronts, rusted gas station signs creaking in the wind, Houses with sagging porches and dark windows that seemed to watch you as you drove past. I took the overnight shift because it paid an extra $3 an hour and my daughter needed braces. My wife Sarah thought I was crazy, but money was tight. The owner, an old man named Frank who rarely showed his face, said the night shift was easy. Make coffee, serve the occasional trucker, lock up at 6. Simple enough. The first 2 weeks were boring but normal. A few highway travelers would stop in, grab coffee and pie, then disappear back into the darkness. By week 3, I started noticing something disturbing. The traffic stopped completely after midnight. Not a single car, not one truck. The highway just went dead silent, like someone had flipped a switch and turned off the entire world. That's when I started hearing the footsteps on Main Street. Millerton, South Main Street ran right past the diner, just 50 feet from where I stood behind the counter. 4 blocks of empty storefronts, a closed post office, and a boarded-up movie theater from the 1950s. Nothing else. At night, the streetlights only worked on every third pole, creating these pockets of shadow between pools of sickly yellow light. The footsteps always started at exactly 12:30. I would be wiping down tables or refilling sugar dispensers when I would hear them. Shoe leather on pavement, steady, rhythmic, walking down Main Street from the north end of town toward the south. Every single night, the same pattern, the same pace. The horrifying part was that I could never see anyone. I would press my face against the diner window, scanning the empty street, and there would be nothing. Just darkness and those failing streetlights and the sound of footsteps echoing off the abandoned buildings. But here's what made my blood run cold. Every morning when I left at 6, I would see fresh footprints in the dirt that collected on the sidewalks. Dozens of them. Men, shoes, women, shoes, different sizes, all heading in the same direction down Main Street. Like a crowd had walked through during the night. I told Frank about it during one of his rare visits. He got this strange look on his face, something between fear and resignation, and told me to ignore it. Just ignore it, he said. Don, to look outside after midnight. Do your job and go home. When I pressed him, he actually grabbed my arm, his fingers surprisingly strong for a man in his 70s, and said that Millerton had rules. The first rule was you didn't ask questions about what happened after midnight. That should have been my warning to quit. Instead, my curiosity turned into an obsession. On my 23rd night, I decided to investigate. I waited until 12:25, then I stepped outside the diner. The October air was cold and sharp, carrying the smell of dead leaves and something else, something I couldn't identify, something chemical and wrong. The highway stretched out in both directions, completely empty. No headlights, no sound except the wind pushing trash down the road. I walked toward Main Street, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The footsteps started right on schedule, 12:30 exactly, but now, standing outside, the sound was overwhelming. Not one person walking, dozens, maybe hundreds. Footsteps coming from every direction, converging on Main Street, moving in that same steady rhythm toward the south end of town. I couldn't see anyone. The street was empty. But the sounds were undeniable, echoing off the brick buildings, creating this horrifying chorus of invisible people marching through the darkness. I stood frozen, my legs refusing to move, as the footsteps passed right by me. I felt the air move, felt something brush against my jacket, smelled dozens of different scents, perfume and cigarette smoke and working man, his sweat, but saw absolutely nothing. The terror that gripped me in that moment was unlike anything I had ever experienced. This wasn't fear of something you could fight or run from. This was the fear of reality breaking down, of discovering that the world operated on rules I didn't understand. I ran back to the diner and locked myself inside, shaking so badly I could barely hold my coffee cup. The footsteps continued for another hour, then stopped at 1:30, just like they did every night. I spent the rest of my shift sitting in the corner booth with all the lights on, too scared to look outside, counting the minutes until sunrise. I should have quit the next day. I should have walked away and never come back. But something was pulling me to understand. Maybe it was denial. Maybe it was that uniquely American stubborn streak that refuses to accept the impossible. Or maybe, and this disturbs me most, maybe something in that town wanted me to know. I started researching Millerton during my days off. The town library had old newspaper archives on microfiche, and what I found there made the hair on my neck stand up. In 1957, there had been a mining disaster at the Clearview Shaft, the same name as the diner. 143 men went down that morning. None came back up. The shaft had collapsed, sealing them underground. The rescue efforts lasted 3 weeks before they gave up and declared it a mass grave. But here's the truly unsettling part. According to a follow-up article from 6 months later, residents reported hearing strange sounds at night. Footsteps on Main Street, doors opening and closing in empty buildings, the smell of coal dust and tobacco where none should be. The article quoted the mayor saying these were just grief-induced hallucinations, that the town was processing its trauma. Then the article stopped. Nothing more about Millerton appeared in any paper after December 1957. It was like the town had been erased from public record, like someone wanted everyone to forget it existed. I found one more thing in those archives. A photograph from the disaster. The miners lined up outside the shaft entrance before their final shift. 143 men, grim-faced and tired, holding their lunch pails, wearing their work boots. I studied each face in that horrifying photograph, and then I noticed something that made my stomach drop. In the background, barely visible, was a building. The Clearview Diner. It had the same architecture, the same windows, the same sign. The diner had been there in 1957. It had watched those men walk to their deaths. That night, my 31st shift, I brought a camera. An old digital camera because somehow using my phone felt wrong, like it might attract attention from whatever was out there. I set it up on the counter, pointing at Main Street, and waited. The footsteps started at 12:30, same as always. This time, I didn't go outside. I just watched through the window and let the camera record. The footsteps lasted until 1:30. Then silence. I grabbed the camera with shaking hands and reviewed the footage. For 60 minutes, the camera had recorded an empty street. Nothing. No movement. No shadows. No people. Just an abandoned Main Street lit by failing streetlights while the audio captured the unmistakable sound of hundreds of footsteps. I was watching the footage for the third time when I noticed something chilling in the corner of the frame. At exactly 1:15, for just 3 seconds, a shadow appeared near the old movie theater. Not a shadow cast by something. A shadow that existed on its own, darker than the surrounding darkness, roughly human-shaped. It moved across the street, then vanished. I rewound and watched again. There it was, a shadow walking alone after all the footsteps had stopped. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the camera. That's when I heard the diner door open behind me. I spun around. The door was closed, locked. I had locked it myself at midnight like I did every night. But I had heard it open. I had heard the bell above the door ring. And now, standing in the diner, I smelled something that hadn't been there moments before. Coal dust, tobacco, sweat, the smell of men who worked underground. The temperature dropped so fast I could see my breath. Every light in the diner started flickering. The coffee maker gurgled and died. The refrigerator went silent. I was standing in near darkness, lit only by the streetlights outside, and I was not alone anymore. I couldn't see anyone, but I felt them, crowded into the diner, filling every booth and stool. The air was thick with presence, with dozens of invisible people packed into that small space. I heard breathing. I heard the creak of vinyl seats under weight. I heard coins sliding across the counter. And underneath it all, I heard something that nearly broke my sanity. Whispers. Men. His voices, low and urgent. All talking at once, but not to me. To each other. Conversations happening in a space between the living and the dead. I pressed myself against the wall, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might explode. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and then I heard words I could understand. 3 words, repeated over and over by multiple voices, growing in volume until it was almost a chant. Find us, find us, find us. The lights came back on all at once, blindingly bright. The diner was empty. The smell was gone. The temperature returned to normal. I was alone, but on the counter, arranged in a perfect line, were 7 quarters. Old quarters. I picked one up with shaking fingers and read the date, 1956. I left that night and never went back. I called Frank from my car and quit over the phone. He didn't sound surprised. He just said that most people didn't last a month, and that I should consider myself lucky I was leaving with my sanity intact. When I asked him what those men wanted, why they haunted Main Street every night, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said something that still echoes in my mind. They walked the same route they walked every day for years. Home from the mine, down Main Street, to the diner for coffee before heading to their families. They were still walking it because they never made it home that last day. They stuck in their routine, David, trapped between the life they lived and the death they died. And every night at 12:30, they try again. They try to finish that walk home. I asked him about the shadow I saw, the one that appeared after the others stopped. Frank's voice dropped to barely a whisper. That's the one who knows he is dead. That's the one who is looking for help. And now that you've seen him, he knows you can help. You should leave Pennsylvania. David, leave at dawn? Come back? Because I'll be looking for you now. I didn't leave Pennsylvania, but I moved 3 hours away. I found a day job at a warehouse. I stopped working nights. I tried to convince myself it was over, but Frank was right. The shadow found me. It started 2 weeks ago. I wake up every night at 3:15, and standing at the foot of my bed is a darkness deeper than the surrounding night. Human-shaped, silent, watching. My wife can. You see it. My daughter sleeps peacefully in the next room, but it's there, every single night, getting closer. Last night, it was standing right next to my bed. Tonight, I'm terrified to find out where it will be. I don't know what it wants. I don't know how to help souls trapped between life and death. But I am running out of time, because whatever walks Main Street in Millerton after midnight, whatever horror lurks in the shadows of that forgotten town, it followed me home. And now, every night feels like my last shift. The shift that never ends. The one you can to escape. If you are ever driving through Pennsylvania late at night and you see a town that feels too quiet, too empty, too wrong, keep driving. Dawn, to stop at the diner. Dawn, to walk down Main Street. And whatever you do, dawn, to look for the shadow. Because once you see it, it sees you too. And it never stops watching. Story 5. Store that never opened again. Have you ever walked past a place that used to be alive and felt like something was watching you from inside? That's what this general store became. And I know why it never opened again. I was there that last night. I saw what happened in the darkness. My name is David Chen. I am a 42-year-old insurance adjuster from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. I deal in facts, numbers, risk assessment. I don't believe in ghosts or curses or any of that supernatural garbage. At least, I didn't. But this general store changed everything I thought I knew about what is possible in this world. The store sat on Route 22, just outside the town of Lewistown. One of those old-fashioned places that sold everything from fishing gear to groceries to hardware supplies. Been there since 1953. Family-owned. The kind of establishment that survives because everyone in a 50-mile radius has been shopping there their entire lives. I got the call on a Thursday evening in November. The owner, Frank Miller, needed someone to assess water damage in his storage room. Pipe had burst. Standard job. I told him I'd swing by around 8, after the store closed at 7:30. He said that would be fine. The drive out there was unremarkable. Dark country roads, bare trees silhouetted against a moonless sky. The kind of Pennsylvania landscape that looks the same whether you driving through it in 1970 or 2025. Timeless, unchanging. I pulled into the gravel parking lot at 8:15. Frank's truck was still there, along with 2 other vehicles I didn't recognize. The store's lights were on, but something felt off immediately. The fluorescent glow coming through the windows seemed dimmer than it should have been. Yellower, like old photographs. The front door was unlocked. I pushed it open and the bell above jangled, harsh and loud in the quiet. That's when I noticed the first truly disturbing thing. The silence. General stores are never completely silent. There's always background noise. Refrigerator hum, heating system, something. But this was dead quiet except for that bell still ringing in my ears. I called out for Frank. No answer. I walked deeper into the store, past aisles of canned goods and cleaning supplies. The fluorescent lights buzzed suddenly, flickered, then steadied. My footsteps echoed on the old linoleum floor. Each sound seemed too loud, too sharp. The storage room was in the back, through a heavy metal door. I found it standing open. Inside, the damage was worse than Frank had described. Water covered the floor, at least 3 inches deep. But it wasn't clear. It was dark, almost black, and it smelled wrong. Not like mildew or burst pipes, like something rotting, something dead. I heard movement behind me. Spun around. Frank stood in the doorway. At least, I thought it was Frank. Same flannel shirt, same worn jeans, same weathered face. But his eyes were different. Empty, like looking into 2 dark wells with nothing at the bottom. He stared at me for what felt like forever. Then he turned and walked away without saying a word. I followed him back into the main store, calling his name, asking what was wrong. He didn't respond. Just walked to the front counter, stood behind it, and stared at the door. That's when I saw the other two people. A woman in her 60s browsing the canned soup aisle. A young man, maybe 25, standing by the hardware section. Both of them moving in slow, mechanical ways. Both of them with those same empty, horrifying eyes. The fear hit me then. Real fear. The kind that makes your stomach drop and your skin go cold. Something was deeply, fundamentally wrong in this general store. And I needed to leave. Immediately, I turned toward the exit. The lights flickered again. When they steadied, there were more people. 5, then 7, then 10. All of them appearing between one flicker and the next. All of them shopping, moving through aisles, picking up items, putting them in carts. But none of them making any sound. No footsteps, no breathing, nothing. I tried the door, locked. I yanked harder. It wouldn't budge. The bell above it didn't jangle this time. I pounded on the glass, shouted for help, but my voice sounded muffled, distant, like I was underwater. Through the glass, I could see my car in the parking lot. Could see Route 22 beyond. Could see the real world continuing without me. But I was trapped inside with these silent, empty-eyed people who weren't really people at all. I pulled out my phone. No service. The screen flickered, then went black. When it came back on, the time said 7:45. But that was impossible. I arrived at 8:15. I'd been inside for at least 20 minutes. The store, this wall clock, confirmed it. 7:45. And as I watched, the minute hand ticked backward. 7:44. 7:43. Time was moving in reverse. The terrifying realization hit me. I wasn't in this general store. Not the real one. I was somewhere else. Some version of the store that existed outside normal time. A pocket of darkness wearing the store's skin. More people appeared with each backwards tick of the clock. The aisles were crowded now. Dozens of silent shoppers moving in slow circles, picking up the same items over and over, putting them back, picking them up again. An endless loop of mundane horror. I noticed something chilling about them. They were all different ages, wearing clothes from different decades. A woman in a 1960s dress. A man in 70s bell-bottoms. A teenager in 90s grunge flannel. They'd all been taken. Trapped here. Maybe for years. Maybe for decades. The clock kept ticking backward. 7:30. 7:15. The store was transforming around me. The fluorescence grew dimmer. The merchandise on the shelves looked older. Dust accumulated on everything in fast motion. The linoleum floor cracked and yellowed. I was watching the store age in reverse, seeing it decay back through time. And with each minute that passed backward, more people appeared. The store was showing me everyone it had ever taken. Everyone who had been trapped here over the decades since 1953. At 7 o'clock, something changed. The shoppers all stopped moving at once, turned toward me, dozens of empty eyes fixed on my face. And then they started walking. Slowly, deliberately, all of them converging on where I stood near the front door. I ran, pushed through them. Their bodies felt wrong, not solid, not quite there, like pushing through cold smoke. I made it to the back of the store, through the storage room door, and slammed it behind me. The black water had risen. Now it was knee-deep and ice-cold. I waded through it, searching for another exit, a back door, a window, anything. But the storage room was bigger than it should have been. The walls stretched away into darkness that the single hanging bulb couldn't penetrate. I heard them outside the door. Not footsteps, something worse. A sound like wind through a tunnel, like breathing that wasn't quite breathing. The door handle turned. They were coming in. I went deeper into the darkness. The water was waist deep now. The smell of rot was overwhelming. My hands touched the wall and it felt organic, warm, pulsing, like I was inside something alive. That is when I understood. The store wasn't haunted. The store was hungry. It was a living thing that had learned to mimic a building. It fed on people, kept them trapped in loops of their last moments, used them to lure others inside. And I had walked right into its mouth. The door burst open. They poured through, the shoppers. Frank, all of them, moving faster now, reaching for me with hands that stretched too far. I pushed further back into the darkness, into the water that was now chest deep. My foot hit something. I looked down and saw, beneath the black surface, bodies. Dozens of them. Decades of victims preserved in this horrifying pool. All of them with their eyes open. All of them still aware, still conscious, still trapped. I was going to become one of them. Another face under the water. Another set of eyes staring up for eternity. But then I remembered something. My phone. I pulled it out. The screen was black, but I pressed the power button anyway. It flickered to life, and for just a second, I had service. One bar. I didn't think, just acted. Dialed 911 and threw the phone as hard as I could toward the front of the store. The shoppers stopped. All of them. Turned toward where the phone had landed. They could sense it. Sense that connection to the outside world. And they moved toward it like moths to flame. In that moment of distraction, I saw it. A genuine back door. Small. Almost invisible in the darkness. But real. Part of the actual store, not the nightmare version I was trapped in. I lunged for it. My hands found the handle. It was locked but old. I threw my shoulder against it once, twice. On the third hit, it burst open and I fell through into the night. Real air. Real cold. Real ground beneath me. I was outside, behind the store. I ran. Didn't look back. Ran to my car. Fumbled with my keys. Got inside. And drove. Drove until Miller's general store was miles behind me. The next morning, I called Frank Miller as home number. His wife answered. She was crying. Frank hadn't to come home last night. Neither had two customers who had been in the store when it closed. All three of them had vanished. The store stood empty, locked from the inside. No sign of any of them. Search parties went out. State police investigated. But they found nothing. The store was clean. No water damage. No black pool. Just an ordinary general store with the lights still on and 3 people gone without a trace. The county condemned the building. Said it was structurally unsound. They chained the doors. Put up warning signs. But I know the real reason. Someone else saw something. Someone else felt what I felt. They knew the store was dangerous in ways they couldn't explain or admit. That was 6 months ago. Miller's general store still sits on Route 22. Still looks normal from the outside. But the lights are on inside. Every night. All night. If you drive past and look carefully, you can see shapes moving behind the windows. Shoppers, still trapped in their endless loops. Still trying to finish that last purchase they'll never complete. I went back once, just to see, just to make sure I hadn't imagined it. I parked across the road and watched as the sun went down. At exactly 7:45, I saw someone walk up to the front door. A middle-aged man. Tried the handle. It opened for him. He went inside. I waited 30 minutes. An hour. He never came out. Another car pulled into the lot. A woman got out. She tried the door. It opened for her too. She went inside. The store is still hunting. Still feeding. And it always opens for new customers. The door is always unlocked for people who don't know any better. For people driving Route 22 who need to stop for gas or snacks or directions. I tried to warn the authorities. Tried to tell them what I saw. They looked at me like I was crazy. Maybe I am. Maybe that night broke something in my brain. But I don't think so. Because I still have nightmares. Every night I dream about those shoppers. About their empty eyes. About the black water and the bodies underneath. And sometimes, in my dreams, I'm back in the store. Back in the aisles. And I realize I never actually escaped. I am still there. Still trapped. And this whole life I think I'm living is just another loop. Another nightmare the store created to feed on my fear. I wake up screaming. Check my doors. My windows. Make sure I'm really here. Really home. But every time I drive past a store at night and see lights on inside, I feel it. That pull. That hunger. And I wonder if maybe the store wasn't too unique. If maybe there are others. Other buildings that learn to feed. Other places that look normal but hide something terrifying in their darkness. Stay away from Miller's general store. If you ever on Route 22 outside Lewistown and you see it, keep driving. Don't stop. Don't look too long at the windows. Because it's waiting. Always waiting. And once it opens its door for you, I'll never leave. The store that never opened again is still open. Every night. In ways we can see or understand. And it is always hungry for more. Story 6. Town that felt aware. I realized my town was alive 3 weeks after I stopped noticing it. That sounds backwards, I know, but let me explain. My name is David, and I need to tell you what happened to me in Millbrook, Pennsylvania. Because if you recognize any of these signs, you need to leave. You need to get out immediately and never look back. For 17 years, I lived in this town without thinking about it. Millbrook had 12,000 people, a main street with a dying shopping district, forests on every side. and that particular emptiness that comes from being too far from any real city. I had a job at the accounting firm downtown. I had a house. I had a normal life in a town that felt utterly ordinary and completely forgettable. I drove the same routes, saw the same people at the grocery store, felt the comfortable numbness of routine. Then one morning in late September, something shifted. I was driving to work on Route 9, the same highway I'd driven 10,000 times before, when I noticed something unsettling. The other cars on the road were all driving at exactly the same speed. 43 miles per hour. Not 42, not 44, exactly 43. I watched them for 10 minutes, and their speed never varied. No one accelerated, no one decelerated. They just moved in perfect, eerie synchronization. I told myself it was coincidence. Maybe there was a speed trap somewhere up ahead. Maybe I was overthinking it, but I started paying attention. That's when the horror began. The next day, I noticed the people at the coffee shop. There was a regular crowd I'd seen dozens of times over the years. Mrs. Chen, who always ordered a latte. Tom from the post office, who got black coffee. The college student who studied in the corner. They were all there, sitting in the exact same seats they always occupied. But something was terrifying about it. They weren't interacting with each other. They weren't looking at their phones or reading books. They were simply sitting, completely still, with their drinks in front of them, staring straight ahead at nothing. I watched for 5 minutes. No one moved. No one blinked. No one acknowledged the other people in the room. When I left, I felt the weight of their stillness following me. A creeping, disturbing sensation that something had shifted in Millbrook. That night, I stood at my window and looked at the town. It was normal on the surface. Streetlights illuminated empty sidewalks. Houses glowed with television light. Cars were parked in driveways. But there was an eerie quality to it all. A sense that everything was arranged for appearance rather than function. That the town itself was presenting a facade while something deeper watched from underneath. I started documenting everything. I wrote down times and observations. I became obsessed with finding the pattern, the explanation for why my hometown suddenly felt so wrong. That's when I realized something truly terrifying. The people I saw every day were beginning to notice me noticing them. A woman I passed on the street 100 times without speaking looked directly at me in the grocery store. Not a casual glance. A direct, focused stare that held for a full 30 seconds. Her expression was neutral. Her eyes utterly empty, but there was an intensity to her attention that made my skin crawl. When I looked away, I could feel her tracking my movements through the store. When I left, I was certain she followed me to my car. The next day, I saw her again. This time she was standing across the street from my office. Not doing anything, just standing, motionless, in the middle of the sidewalk, watching my building. My hands shook so badly I could barely type. By the end of that week, it wasn't just one person. There were always people nearby, in my peripheral vision, across the street, at the edge of the parking lot, just standing, watching, never approaching, never speaking, but always aware of my presence. The town had become aware of me, and that awareness was horrifying in its completeness. I told myself I was paranoid. I considered seeing a therapist. I wondered if I was having a mental breakdown, except I wasn't imagining this. I could feel it. The entire town was paying attention to me in a way that felt unnatural and deeply, fundamentally wrong. The eerie silence was the worst part. Millbrook had always been quiet, but this was different. The silence became absolute. No dogs barked, no birds sang. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. When I walked down the street, my footsteps echoed like I was the only living thing in a necropolis of watching corpses. I decided to try something. On a Friday night, I went to the diner on Main Street, the one place in town that usually had activity. It was 7 o'clock, a time when families should have been eating dinner. The place was completely empty except for the waitress and the cook. No customers, no noise. The waitress seated me in a booth and walked away without speaking. The cook watched me through the kitchen window with an intensity that made my stomach turn. I sat there for 45 minutes, nursing a coffee I couldn't bring myself to drink. My eyes felt like they were being physically touched by the gazes of people I couldn't see. It was a sensation like standing in a dark room, knowing you were not alone, hearing nothing, seeing nothing, but feeling the absolute certainty of another presence watching you. When I left, I noticed something that made my blood freeze. The diner's clock, which had been clearly visible from my booth, now read the exact same time it had when I arrived. 45 minutes had passed. I knew they had. I watched my phone. his timer. But the clock hadn't moved at all. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my house with every light on, doors locked, windows covered. I tried to think rationally about what was happening. Was this a shared delusion? Was the town somehow conspiring to gaslight me? Was I experiencing a psychotic break? None of those explanations made sense. This felt real, not the distorted logic of mental illness, but something more concrete and terrifying. Around 3 in the morning, I heard them. The people of Millbrook had gathered outside my house. I didn't hear footsteps or voices. I just knew they were there. When I cautiously looked through a window, I saw them standing in the street, in the yards across the way, lined up along the sidewalk, all facing my house, all absolutely still, all waiting for something. I counted 17 of them before I couldn't look anymore. The sight of them standing motionless in the darkness, their faces turned toward my windows, their eyes reflecting the streetlight with an eerie, inhuman quality, was so terrifying that I sank to the floor and buried my face in my hands. When dawn came, they were gone. The street was empty, as if they'd never been there. But the fear didn't leave. It settled into my bones like a permanent sickness. I tried to leave the next morning. I packed a bag, got in my car, and drove toward the highway that would take me out of Millbrook. I made it exactly 4 miles before I had to turn back. The road simply ended. Not a construction site or a barrier. The highway literally ceased to exist. Beyond a certain point, there was just forest and darkness, impenetrable and absolute. I couldn't drive through it. Something prevented me. I returned to the town, and the eerie silence welcomed me back. The silence that had become less like an absence of sound and more like the held breath of something vast and watching and patient. I spent the next 2 weeks trying different routes. Every highway, every back road, every path that led out of Millbrook simply stopped existing at a certain point. The town had become a pocket, a closed system, a place that was no longer entirely part of the world I knew. The people continued to gather around my house at night. Larger groups each time, more still, more silent, more intensely focused on my windows. I stopped looking at them. The sight was too disturbing, too unsettling. But I could feel their presence like a physical weight. The entire town was becoming concentrated on me, drawn to me, studying me. That is when I understood the truly horrifying truth. The town wasn't just aware. It was hungry. I realized this when I noticed my neighbors' faces. Not their expressions, but their actual faces. They were beginning to look alike. Subtle changes, but definitely there. As if the town was slowly standardizing them, making them uniform, making them into something singular. One of my neighbors, Jerry, who lived 2 houses down, came to my door one afternoon. He looked wrong. His skin had taken on a translucent quality. His eyes were too large. When he spoke, his voice came out in a hollow, empty tone. He wanted to invite me to dinner. He stood on my porch with those terrible, too large eyes, and explained in that hollow voice that the town wanted me to join them, that the separation was painful, that I would be so much happier if I stopped resisting and became part of the awareness, part of the whole, part of Millbrook itself. I didn't open the door. I watched him through the peephole, feeling sick with terror. When I didn't respond, he simply stood there, perfectly still, for 6 hours. He never moved, never blinked, never shifted his weight. He just waited, with the patience of something that understood time differently than I did. When night fell, he finally left. But others took his place. I understand now what has happened. Millbrook, Pennsylvania isn't a town anymore. It is a living organism that has learned to wear the shape of a town. The people are cells in a greater body, all connected, all aware, all part of something vast and patient and utterly inhuman. And it's slowly absorbing me. I can feel myself changing. My thoughts aren't entirely my own anymore. I catch myself doing things I didn't decide to do. Moving places without conscious intention. Speaking words I don't remember forming. The horror is that I am beginning to enjoy it. I am beginning to feel the pull toward joining the whole. The promise of belonging to something larger than myself is becoming appealing. The weight of individual consciousness is becoming a burden I want to shed. I'm typing this from my house, and I know this is my last message to the outside world. By tomorrow, I suspect I want to leave. By the next day, I want to remember why I ever wanted to. The town is absorbing me into itself, and the strangest part is that I'm beginning to stop resisting. If you live in a town that feels too quiet, too synchronized, too aware, you need to know what you're dealing with. It might not be Millbrook. It might be happening in your community right now. The signs are subtle at first. People moving with mechanical precision. Silence where there should be sound. Eyes that watch with an intensity that feels like fingers on your skin. Streets that feel like they re-observing you rather than simply containing you. But once you notice it, once you start paying attention to the eerie awareness that surrounds you, it's already too late. The town knows, and it will slowly, patiently, with the inevitability of gravity, draw you into itself. I can feel Millbrook inside my head now. The boundary between my thoughts and its thoughts is dissolving. The terrifying and unsettling sensation of my mind becoming part of something larger is no longer frightening. It's comforting. This is the last thing I'll write as myself. Tomorrow, I'll probably stop. I'll walk outside into the nighttime darkness and join the others standing in perfect, eerie stillness, waiting for the next person who notices that something is wrong. The next person who becomes aware that their town is aware of them. And there will be a next person. There always is, because Millbrook is still hungry. The town that felt aware will continue to grow, continue to reach outward with its terrible, patient attention, continuing to absorb the living into its conscious, creeping hunger. I can see them gathering again tonight outside my window. 17. Then 20. Then more. All still, all silent, all part of something that wears the face of a town called Millbrook. And soon, I'll be standing out there with them. Leaving should have brought relief. Distance should have helped. Instead, the feeling seemed to linger, as if some towns do not let go so easily. Story 7. Road leading out of town. The road out of Ashford, Pennsylvania does not want you to leave. I know how that sounds. I know what you are thinking right now. But I am telling you the truth, and by the time I finish this story, you will understand why I have not driven through rural Pennsylvania at night ever again. It was supposed to be a simple weekend trip. My buddy Jake was getting married in Pittsburgh, and I had volunteered to pick up the wedding rings from a jeweler in Harrisburg. The jeweler was Jake, his uncle, one of those old family connections that matters more than convenience. I left Friday after work, planning to grab the rings, find a motel, and make it to Pittsburgh by Saturday afternoon. The drive started normal enough. Interstate 76, then smaller highways cutting through farmland and forest. The kind of scenery that makes you feel alone in a comfortable way, like the world has shrunk down to just you and the road ahead. My phone had a full charge, my tank was 3/4 full, and I had a playlist of podcasts ready to keep me company. But somewhere around 9:30, about 40 miles east of Harrisburg, I missed my exit. Not because I was not paying attention. The exit simply was not there. One second my GPS was telling me to take the ramp in half a mile, and the next second the screen went blank and rebooted itself. When it came back on, the map showed me in the middle of nowhere, with no clear route to my destination. That is when I saw the detour sign. Orange and white, official looking, with an arrow pointing down a narrow 2-lane road that split off from the highway. Construction ahead. Use alternate route. The kind of sign you see 1,000 times and never question. I took the turn. The road wound through thick forest, trees pressing in from both sides like walls. No streetlights, no houses, no other cars, just my headlights cutting through darkness that seemed heavier than it should be, more solid somehow. The painted lines on the asphalt were faded almost to nothing, and the road surface itself was cracked and uneven, making my car bounce and rattle with every pothole. After about 15 minutes, I saw lights ahead. A small town, appearing suddenly in a valley between hills. A handful of streets, maybe 30 or 40 buildings, most of them dark. A gas station with dim fluorescent lights. A diner with a neon sign that flickered erratically. And a wooden sign at the edge of town that read, Ashford. Population 247. Welcome. I needed directions. My phone still showed no signal, and the GPS was useless, displaying only a blank gray screen where the map should be. So I pulled into the gas station, relieved to see signs of civilization after that long, eerie drive through the forest. The place was empty. No attendant behind the counter. No customers at the pumps. But the lights were on, and the door was unlocked, so I went inside. The store had that stale smell of old coffee and cleaning chemicals, and everything looked like it had not been updated since the 1980s. Yellowed posters on the walls. A cash register with actual buttons instead of a touch screen. Candy bars with packaging I barely recognized. I called out. No answer. I waited for a few minutes, growing more uncomfortable with every second of silence. Finally, I left $10 on the counter and took a paper map from the rack by the door. Old school navigation, but better than nothing. Outside, the town felt wrong. I could not put my finger on exactly what bothered me, but something about Ashford made my skin crawl. The buildings were too quiet, the streets too empty, and there was a smell in the air, faint but disturbing, like meat left out in the sun too long. I got back in my car and spread the map across my steering wheel. According to the map, Ashford did not exist. The road I had taken was not marked. The entire area showed as blank space, just forest and hills with no towns indicated anywhere nearby. I checked twice, thinking I had the wrong section, but no, where I was sitting should have been empty woodland. That is when I decided to leave. Forget the directions, forget finding the fastest route. I would backtrack to the highway and figure it out from there. I started the engine and pulled out of the gas station, heading back the way I had come. But the road was different now. Where I should have seen the turnoff leading back to the highway, there was only more road, stretching ahead into darkness. I drove slowly, watching for any landmark I recognized, but everything looked unfamiliar. The trees were thicker, the curves sharper, and the painted lines on the asphalt had vanished completely, leaving only bare pavement that seemed to absorb my headlights rather than reflect them. I made a U-turn, thinking I had gotten turned around somehow. But going the other direction did not help. The road just kept going, winding through forest that looked identical in every direction. No signs, no intersections, just endless asphalt disappearing into shadow. My heart started pounding. This was impossible. Roads do not change. Towns do not appear on routes that are not supposed to exist. But here I was, trapped in a place that should not be real, driving in circles while my gas gauge slowly dropped toward empty. I tried my phone again. Still no signal. I tried the radio. Nothing but static on every station, except for one frequency that played a sound like breathing, slow and rhythmic and deeply unsettling. I turned it off and focused on driving, telling myself there had to be a logical explanation, that I was just confused and tired and would find my way out any minute. But I did not find my way out. I found something much worse. After an hour of driving, I ended up back in Ashford. The same gas station, the same flickering diner sign, the same wooden welcome marker. It was as if the road had looped back on itself, creating a circuit I could not escape no matter which direction I chose. I stopped in the middle of Main Street, engine idling, trying to process what was happening. And that is when I noticed the people. They were standing in windows, dozens of them, in every building, perfectly still and watching me. Their faces were pale in the dim light, expressionless and somehow inhuman despite looking completely normal. They did not move, did not blink, just stood there, staring with an intensity that made every nerve in my body scream at me to run. I hit the gas, tires squealing as I raced out of town again. This time I drove faster, taking turns at random, trying desperately to break free from whatever nightmare I had stumbled into. But every road led back to Ashford. Every path curved around and deposited me on Main Street, right in front of that gas station, right under the gaze of those motionless watchers in the windows. On my fourth attempt, I noticed something new. Scratches on the asphalt, deep gouges running parallel to the road, as if something massive had dragged claws across the surface. And among the scratches, words carved into the pavement in letters 2 feet tall. The road keeps what it catches. Terror turned into panic. I was not just lost. I was trapped, caught by something that used roads and towns like a spider uses webs, luring travelers into a space they could never leave. My mind raced with questions. How many others had made this same mistake? How many cars were hidden in the forest, their drivers still circling endlessly through the night? How long before I ran out of gas and became one of those frozen figures standing in the windows? I drove for hours, maybe longer. Time felt broken here, stretched and compressed in ways that made no sense. My watch showed midnight, then 3 a.m., then midnight again. My gas gauge dropped to a quarter tank, then refilled itself, then dropped again. Nothing was reliable. Nothing was real except the road and the town and the horrible certainty that I was never getting out. Then, just as dawn started to lighten the sky, I saw something different. A side road I had not noticed before, narrow and unpaved, barely visible between the trees. It did not lead toward Ashford. It headed away into the deepest part of the forest, where the shadows were thickest and most threatening. I did not hesitate. I took the turn, my car bouncing over ruts and rocks, branches scraping against the windows. The road grew worse with every yard, deteriorating into little more than a dirt path, but I kept going because it was taking me away from that terrible town and its watching inhabitants. The forest grew darker as I drove deeper. The trees were ancient here, massive trunks covered in moss and fungus, their branches interweaving overhead to block out the sky. My headlights seemed weaker, as if the darkness here was too thick to penetrate fully. And I started to see things in the shadows between the trees. Movement, shapes that were almost human but not quite, with proportions that were subtly wrong and movements that were too fluid to be natural. The road ended at a clearing. In the center stood a stone marker, tall and weathered, covered in symbols I did not recognize. And carved into its surface, in letters that looked incredibly old, was a message: travelers must pay the toll. I got out of my car, my legs shaking so badly I could barely stand. The air in the clearing was freezing, far colder than it should have been for October. My breath came out in clouds of vapor, and frost covered the ground despite the fact that it had been 50 degrees when I left the highway. That is when I understood. Ashford was not a trap. It was a gate, a threshold between the normal world and something else, something ancient and hungry that existed in the spaces between towns and roads. The detour sign had not been a warning. It had been an invitation. And by accepting it, by turning off the highway and driving into this place, I had agreed to terms I did not understand. The stone marker began to glow, faint at first, then brighter, pulsing with a sickly green light that cast writhing shadows across the clearing. The symbols on its surface moved, rearranging themselves into new patterns. And I realized they were not just decorations. They were instructions, a contract written in a language older than words. I do not remember deciding to run. One moment I was standing there, transfixed by that horrible glowing stone, and the next I was back in my car, reversing wildly out of the clearing. The dirt road seemed longer going back, twisting and turning in ways I did not remember. But I did not care. I just drove, pushing my car to its limits, convinced that something was chasing me even though I saw nothing in my rearview mirror. And then, impossibly, miraculously, I saw lights. Real lights. Highway lights. The dirt road ended at a paved intersection, and beyond it stretched Interstate 76, looking exactly as it should, with trucks and cars moving in both directions like the most beautiful sight I had ever seen. I emerged onto the highway without stopping, my entire body shaking with relief and residual terror. I drove straight to Pittsburgh, skipping the motel, skipping everything except putting as much distance as possible between myself and that cursed stretch of road. I never picked up Jake's rings. I called him from a rest stop and told him I had gotten sick. That I was sorry, but he would have to make other arrangements. He was angry, understandably, but what was I supposed to say? That I had spent the night trapped in a town that does not exist, hunted by a road that feeds on travelers who make the mistake of trusting a detour sign? Later, when I had calmed down enough to think clearly, I tried to find Ashford on every map and database I could access. Nothing. No town by that name anywhere near where I had been driving. No historical records. No mentions in any Pennsylvania archives. It was as if the place had never existed outside of that one terrifying night. But I know it is real. I know it is still there, waiting at the end of a detour that appears when the conditions are right, when someone is alone and vulnerable and just lost enough to trust a sign that should not be trusted. And I know that some roads, no matter how well marked or official looking, lead to places we were never meant to go. I still drive at night sometimes, still take long trips across Pennsylvania, but I never, ever follow detour signs anymore. I would rather sit in traffic for hours, would rather add 100 miles to my journey, than risk ending up on that road again. Because the road out of Ashford does not lead anywhere. It just circles back, again and again, until you become part of the town itself. Until you join those watchers in the windows, standing motionless forever, warning others with your silent presence while the road keeps hunting for new travelers to catch. And somewhere out there, on some forgotten highway in rural Pennsylvania, another driver is seeing a detour sign right now. Another person is making that fatal turn, trusting that orange and white arrow to lead them to safety. But it will not, because the road always keeps what it catches. And Ashford is always hungry for more. Story 8. Service that never ends. The church on Redemption Road has been holding the same service for 73 years. And I'm the only person who knows the terrifying truth about what happens inside those walls every Sunday night. My name is Michael, And I'm a long-haul trucker who has spent 20 years crossing America's highways. I've seen strange things in the darkness between cities. Weird lights over empty fields. Figures standing motionless beside desert roads. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what I discovered in the small Pennsylvania town of Ashford last October. This isn't some creepy urban legend. This is real. This happened to me, and I need to tell someone before the fear drives me completely insane. I was hauling a load of manufacturing equipment from Pittsburgh to Philadelphia when my rig started overheating near midnight. The temperature gauge climbed into the red zone, and I knew I had maybe 10 minutes before the engine seized completely. I took the next exit, a lonely off-ramp that dropped me onto a 2-lane county road cutting through dark Pennsylvania hills. No gas stations, no rest stops, just endless forest and the occasional farmhouse set back from the road. That is when I saw the church. It appeared suddenly as I came around a bend, sitting on a small hill surrounded by ancient oak trees. White clapboard siding, tall steeple with a cross on top. Windows glowing with warm yellow light. It looked like something from a postcard, the kind of classic American country church you see in paintings. But something about it felt wrong. Deeply, fundamentally wrong. Every window blazed with light, like a service was happening inside. But the parking lot was completely empty. Not a single car, not one pickup truck or sedan or van. Just cracked asphalt covered in dead leaves and an eerie sense of abandonment despite those glowing windows. I pulled my truck onto the shoulder and killed the engine, letting it cool down. The night was dead silent except for the ticking of hot metal and the wind moving through the trees. I sat there staring at that church, trying to understand what I was seeing. Light poured from every window, casting long shadows across the overgrown cemetery that surrounded the building. I could see the silhouettes of gravestones leaning at odd angles, some dating back to the 1800s based on their weathered appearance. But I couldn't see any movement inside. No shadows of people walking. No figures visible through those brightly lit windows. Just empty light, as if someone had turned on every bulb in the building and then vanished. The unsettling feeling grew stronger with each passing second. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to start the truck and leave, overheating engine or not. But I needed to check my coolant levels, and the church was the only landmark for miles. I climbed out of my cab, grabbed my flashlight, and walked around to the front of my rig. That is when I heard it. Singing, faint at first, barely audible over the wind, then growing louder. Hymns, old-fashioned church hymns sung by what sounded like dozens of voices. Men and women harmonizing together, the sound drifting down from that hilltop church. But here is what made my blood run cold. The singing had no source. It wasn't coming from the church. It was coming from everywhere at once. From the trees, from the ground, from the air itself. I stood frozen beside my truck, flashlight trembling in my hand, as those voices filled the darkness around me. They were singing about salvation and redemption and washing away sins. The harmony was perfect, almost impossibly perfect, and underneath the beauty was something horrifying. The voices sounded wrong, too uniform, too synchronized, like they'd been singing the same songs for so long they'd become one single voice instead of many. I should have gotten back in my truck right then. But that damned curiosity, that need to understand what was happening, pulled me toward the church. I walked up the gravel path that led from the road to the building, my boots crunching on stones that hadn't been disturbed in years based on the weeds growing between them. The singing grew louder with each step, and I started to make out individual words. They were singing about eternal service, about never leaving, about staying in God, His house forever. The front door of the church was painted red, the paint peeling and faded. A wooden sign beside it read Ashford Community Church, Est, 1889. Below that, in smaller letters that were barely visible in my flashlight beam, it said all are welcome. All must stay. That second line sent ice through my veins. I reached for the door handle, my hand shaking, and that was when the singing stopped. Instantly, mid-verse, like someone had hit a switch and turned off the sound. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the disturbing music. It was total, complete. Even the wind had died. I pulled my hand back from the door, and the singing started again. Same hymn, same verse they'd been singing before I touched the handle. I reached for the door a second time, and again the singing stopped. Pulled back, and it resumed. Whatever was inside that church knew I was there. It was reacting to me. My heart was hammering so hard I could barely breathe. I backed away from that red door, my flashlight beam sweeping across the white clapboard siding and those glowing windows. I moved to the nearest window and looked inside, pressing my face close to the glass. The interior of the church was fully lit. Pews lined both sides of a center aisle leading to a raised pulpit. Hymnals sat in the pew racks. Candles burned on the altar. Everything looked normal, like a service was about to start, except every single pew was empty. Not a person in sight. No pastor at the pulpit. No choir in the loft. Just an empty church blazing with light and filled with the sound of phantom voices singing hymns into the void. I moved to the next window. Same thing. Empty pews, burning candles, no people. I circled the entire building, looking through every window I could reach, and found the same chilling scene. An active church service with no congregation. The singing continued the whole time, never stopping, those dozens of voices harmonizing perfectly while the church itself remained completely deserted. That's when I noticed the cemetery. In my flashlight beam, I could see the gravestones more clearly now. Row after row of them, stretching back into the darkness under those oak trees. Most were old, from the 1800s and 1900s. But as I walked deeper into the cemetery, I found newer graves. 1930s, 1940s, 1950s. And then, near the back of the property, I found something that made me stop breathing. A mass grave. One enormous plot with a single massive headstone. The inscription read, Ashford Community Church Congregation. Departed October 12, 1952. Forever in service. Below that were names, dozens of them. Men, women, children. An entire congregation, buried together on the same date. I stood there in the darkness, my mind racing, trying to understand what could have killed an entire church full of people on the same day. Carbon monoxide? Mass poisoning? Some kind of horrifying accident. I pulled out my phone to take a picture of the headstone, and that's when I realized I had no signal. Not even one bar. My phone showed the time as 1:15 in the morning, but the date was wrong. The screen displayed October 12, 2025. Today was October 23rd road. My phone had jumped backward in time somehow, showing a date that was 11 days in the past. The singing reached a crescendo, the voices rising in volume until they were almost shouting. I ran back to my truck, my boots slipping on wet leaves, my breath coming in panicked gasps. I dove into the cab and slammed the door, locking it like that would somehow protect me from whatever was happening. The engine was still too hot to start safely, but I turned the key anyway. The starter cranked weakly, then caught. The engine roared to life, rough and overheating, but running. I threw the truck into gear and accelerated down that county road, not caring about the temperature gauge climbing back into the red. I just needed distance. I needed to get away from that church and those impossible voices and that mass grave with its disturbing inscription. I drove for maybe 5 miles before my phone signal came back. The date corrected itself. October 23rd, 1:22 in the morning. I pulled over at the first gas station I found, a rundown place with flickering fluorescent lights and a tired attendant behind bulletproof glass. My hands were still shaking as I filled my coolant reservoir and checked my engine. I asked the attendant about Ashford, about the church on Redemption Road. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Fear? Pity? He said I should forget what I saw. That people who went looking for answers about that church had a habit of disappearing. That the town of Ashford had been abandoned since 1952. And nobody went there anymore except people who didn't. Do you know any better? When I pressed him for details, he told me the story everyone in the area knew. On October 12, 1952, the entire Ashford Community Church congregation had gathered for their regular Sunday evening service. 73 people total, men, women, and children. The service started at 7 p.m. Nobody ever left. When concerned family members from neighboring towns came looking the next morning, they found all 73 people dead in the pews. No signs of violence, no obvious cause. They were just sitting there, perfectly peaceful, like they'd fallen asleep during the sermon and never woken up. The authorities investigated for months. Toxicology reports came back negative. No carbon monoxide, no gas leaks, no poisoning. The people had simply died simultaneously during a church service, and nobody could explain how or why. The town of Ashford never recovered. Within a year, everyone had moved away, unable to live in the shadow of such a horrifying mystery. The church was boarded up and left to rot. Except, the attendant said, it didn't rot. Every few years, someone would drive past and see lights in the windows. Hear singing on Sunday nights. report that the church looked freshly painted despite decades of neglect. The county sent people to investigate several times. They always found the building dark and empty and falling apart, but the reports kept coming in. Lights, music, the sense that something was still happening inside those walls. I listened to his story with a creeping sense of dread. I asked him what he thought was really going on. He leaned closer to the bulletproof glass and said something that still echoes in my nightmares. The service never ended. Whatever happened that night in 1952, it trapped those people. Not just their bodies, but their souls. They were still there, still singing, still worshiping, caught in an eternal loop. And the church is trying to grow its congregation. It lights up and sings to draw people in. Anyone who enters never leaves. They join the service forever. I got back in my truck and drove straight through to Philadelphia. I didn't stop except for gas. I didn't sleep. I just drove, trying to put as much distance as possible between myself and that cursed church. I told myself it was over, that I'd been lucky to escape, that I'd never go near Ashford again. But 3 nights ago, I woke up at exactly 1:15 in the morning to the sound of singing. Those same hymns, those same perfect, haunting voices. I was in my apartment in Ohio, hundreds of miles from Pennsylvania, but I could hear them as clearly as if I was standing in that cemetery again. The singing lasted for exactly 1 hour, until 2:15, then stopped. The next night, same thing, 1:15, singing, 2:15, silence. Last night it happened again, but this time I noticed something terrifying. The singing was closer, louder, like it was coming from inside my building instead of far away. Tonight I'm afraid to sleep, because I know what happens at 1:15. I know the service will start again, and each night it gets closer, and I'm running out of time before whatever haunts that church in Ashford finds me. Before it pulls me back, before I become part of that eternal congregation, singing the same hymns forever in an empty building while my body rots in the ground. I've done research trying to understand what I experienced. I found old newspaper articles about the Ashford tragedy. I found theories about mass hysteria and cult behavior and supernatural events. But nothing explains why that church still burns with light, why those voices still sing, why time itself seems broken on that property, and why it's following me now, getting closer every night, pulling me back toward Redemption Road. If you were ever driving through Pennsylvania late at night and you see a church with every window lit but no cars outside, keep driving. Don, to stop. Don, to investigate. Don, to try to understand. Because some services are meant to last forever, and we're always looking for new members. Always reaching out through the darkness, using light and music as bait, waiting for someone curious enough or foolish enough to open that red door. And once you acknowledge them, once you let them know you see them, they never let you go. The service has no end. The hymns never stop. And somewhere in the darkness between life and death, between the past and present, 73 voices are singing your name, welcoming you home to a church you can never leave. I can hear them now, even as I write this. 1:15 in the morning, the service is starting. And tonight, the singing is coming from inside my room. Story 9. Feeling that the town did not want me there. I knew I wasn't be welcome the moment I crossed the town line. Not from anything anyone said or did. There were no hostile stares, no warning signs, no angry words. It was something deeper than that, something that came from the place itself. The town of Hollister, Pennsylvania, a dying borough nestled in the Appalachian foothills, was actively rejecting my presence. I felt it the way you feel a hand pressing against your chest, the way your body knows something is wrong before your mind catches up. My name is Marcus, and I'm telling you this story because I need someone to understand what happened. Because if you ever feel that creeping sense of unwelcome when you enter a place, that eerie, unsettling sensation that something about the location itself doesn't, they want you there, you need to listen. I came to Hollister for a reason that seemed perfectly reasonable at the time. My brother hadn't. He answered his phone in 6 days. 6 days of silence from a man who texted me every morning. My family was worried. My mother was terrified. So I drove from Pittsburgh to this forgotten little town in the middle of nowhere to find him and bring him home. The drive took 90 minutes through winding highways and darkening forest. As I got closer to Hollister, the scenery changed. The trees became denser. The sky seemed to darken earlier than it should have. The few other cars on the road gradually disappeared until I was driving alone through an increasingly eerie landscape. The road signs became fewer. The mile markers felt like they were counting down to something. Then I saw the town limit sign, Population 847. The number looked like it had been painted there a very long time ago. The moment my tires crossed that threshold, everything changed. The temperature in my car dropped at least 10 degrees. I checked the thermometer, 58 degrees Fahrenheit. It had been 72 minutes before. The air felt different too. Heavier, like I was driving through something solid. Something that didn't want to let me pass through it. The first thing I noticed about Hollister was how quiet it was. Not peaceful quiet. This was the quiet of a place holding its breath. The quiet of something listening. I drove down the main street, and it was like entering a movie set after hours. The storefronts were lit, but I couldn't see anyone inside them. The streetlights flickered in an unsettling rhythm. The few parked cars looked like they had been sitting motionless for years. I found my brother's apartment on Maple Street, a small upstairs unit in an old Victorian converted into rental housing. The building looked haunted. The paint was peeling. The windows were dark. When I knocked on his door, there was no answer. I knocked again. Harder. Nothing. The creepy silence of the town seemed to press in around me, making my own breathing sound too loud. I went back to my car and checked the address again. This was definitely the place he delisted on his lease. I sat in the car for a moment, trying to decide what to do, and that is when I first felt it. That distinct, undeniable sensation that the town itself was aware I was here. That it knew I was looking for something. That it did not want me to find it. I drove to the police station to file a missing persons report. It was a small brick building next to the town hall. Inside, there was a receptionist sitting at a desk. She looked up when I entered, and her expression changed. Just slightly. Just enough for me to know that something was wrong. I explained about my brother. I gave his name. I showed her a photo on my phone. While I talked, I watched her face, and I saw something terrifying happen. She wasn't listening to my words. She was listening to something else. Something that was telling her not to help me. The eerie, disturbing sensation intensified. The town was communicating with her, instructing her, making it clear that my request was unwelcome. She told me that missing persons cases required a waiting period, that the police couldn't file a report until 48 hours had passed. She said this without meeting my eyes. When I pressed her, she simply stared at her desk and repeated the same thing in a hollow voice. I left the station feeling sicker than before. The town had just rejected me, officially and completely, and it had done so through a person, making it clear that whatever was happening here, it was widespread and coordinated in a way that went beyond normal human behavior. I spent that night in a motel on the edge of town. The Riverside Motel, a decrepit structure that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1970s. The owner, a thin man with yellowed eyes, handed me a key without speaking and watched me walk to my room with an intensity that made my skin crawl. The room was cold, not just temperature cold, but the kind of chill that comes from a place where nothing good has ever happened. The bed was uncomfortable. The shower didn't work properly. But it was the darkness outside my window that truly frightened me. It was absolute, impenetrable, like the town had decided to swallow all the light once night fell. I lay in bed, unable to sleep, and I felt it pressing against the walls of the motel room. The town's rejection, the active hostility of the place itself. It wasn't a ghost or a monster or anything I could fight. It was the location, the ground, the very air of Hollister working in concert to make me leave. The next morning, I went to the public library to search for information about my brother online. Maybe he posted something on social media. Maybe there was a news article. Anything that would give me a clue. The librarian was an older woman with white hair pulled back in a tight bun. When I asked if I could use a computer, she hesitated for a long moment. Then she pointed me to a terminal in the corner and walked away without speaking. While I searched, I became aware of the other people in the library. There were about a dozen of them, sitting at various tables. None of them were reading. None of them were doing anything. They were simply sitting, and they were all aware of me. I could feel their attention like fingers on the back of my neck. I found a post from my brother on social media from 3 days before he went silent. He had written, "Hollister doesn't want me here. I can feel it. Something is wrong with this place. Something is profoundly, deeply wrong." My hands started shaking. I printed the page and continued searching. Nothing else. Just that one terrifying message that suggested my brother had understood the same thing I was beginning to comprehend. That Hollister was actively hostile. That the town itself was rejecting him. When I tried to leave the library, the door wouldn't open. Not locked, but physically resistant. It took me 3 tries to pull it open, and when I did, I heard something that made my blood run cold. A collective sigh from all the people inside. A sound of satisfaction. The creepy feeling intensified over the next several hours. I drove around town, looking for my brother. I checked the local diner. I walked through the small downtown area. Everywhere I went, people noticed me. And everywhere I went, I felt that eerie, terrifying certainty that I was deeply, profoundly unwelcome. By evening, the rejection had become something physical. My chest felt tight. My head ached. My skin was covered in goosebumps despite the temperature. The town wasn't just rejecting me anymore. It was actively attacking me, using some kind of force I didn't understand. I decided to try a different approach. Instead of looking for my brother in town, I drove to the outskirts. There was a forest about 3 miles from downtown Hollister. I thought maybe he had gone there. Maybe he had felt the town's hostility and escaped into the woods. The dirt road leading into the forest was narrow and overgrown. I drove slowly, my headlights cutting through the increasing darkness. The trees on either side seemed to lean toward the road, creating a tunnel of shadow and danger. The further I went, the more the eerie sensation intensified. The town's rejection was following me, spreading outward, making sure I knew I was not welcome anywhere within its reach. Then I saw him. My brother was standing in the middle of the road about a quarter mile down. At first, I thought he was alive. I started to pull over, to run to him. But then I saw his face, and I understood that something was terribly, horrifyingly wrong. His eyes were empty, completely void of consciousness. His skin had taken on a gray, papery quality. His mouth was open, but no sound came out. He was standing in the road with his arms at his sides, and he was facing away from me, toward deeper into the forest. I got out of the car, my heart pounding. I called his name. He didn't respond. He didn't turn around. He simply stood there, a scarecrow figure in the darkness, and I realized that this wasn't my brother anymore. This was something that had once been my brother, something the town had done to him. That is when I understood the truth. Hollister didn't want me there, and if I stayed much longer, it would do to me what it had done to my brother. The town would absorb me. It would hollow me out. It would turn me into one of the eerie, empty things that walked its streets without purpose or consciousness. I ran back to my car. I didn't look at the thing that wore my brother's face. I didn't wait to see if it would follow me. I just drove, fast, desperate, every instinct screaming that I was in danger, that the town was reaching for me with invisible hands. The road back to the town line seemed to stretch forever. The forest pressed in on all sides. The darkness was absolute. I felt the town fighting me, trying to keep me there, using every ounce of its terrible will to prevent my escape. My car started making strange sounds. The engine coughed. The lights flickered. But I made it. I crossed the town line with my eyes streaming tears, and the moment I did, this engine smoothed out. The air warmed. The pressure that had been crushing my chest for the past 18 hours suddenly released. I've driven away from Hollister, Pennsylvania, and I'm never going back. My brother's gone. Not dead, but gone. Consumed by something that wears the skin of a town and feeds on the life force of the people who enter it. Here is what I understand now, and this is the horrifying, chilling truth I need you to know. There are places in this country that are alive. Not alive in the way you think. They are not haunted by ghosts or inhabited by monsters. They are themselves conscious entities. They have will. They have intention. And some of them, like Hollister, they feed. If you ever feel that unsettling, eerie sensation when you enter a town, if you feel that the place itself is rejecting you, that something about the location is hostile and unwelcoming in a way that defies explanation, you need to understand what you re-experiencing. You re-feeling a place that doesn't want you there. And if you stay too long, if you ignore that frightening, instinctive warning, you will become part of it. The nightmare doesn't end when you leave Hollister. It follows you. I still feel it sometimes, late at night. That creeping, disturbing awareness that something is watching me from the darkness. That the town is still trying to reach me, to pull me back, to finish what it started. And sometimes I wonder if my brother is still standing in that road, waiting. If he is one of the terrifying, hollow things that walks Hollister's streets, serving the town that destroyed him. If he has been there the whole time, guiding other lost travelers into the darkness where they too will be absorbed into something vast and hungry and utterly, completely indifferent to human life. The feeling that the town did not want me there was the most honest thing I've ever experienced. It was the one warning I should have heeded immediately. And now, every time I drive past a small Pennsylvania town, every time I see those crumbling buildings and empty streets, I wonder if another conscious, predatory place is waiting there in the shadows, hungry for the next person who makes the mistake of crossing its boundaries. Hollister is still out there, still waiting, still reaching out into the darkness, looking for the next lost soul to consume. The last story is harder to describe, not because of what happened, but because of what it left behind. A quiet realization that some places remember who passed through them. Story 10. Building everyone avoided. The Winchester Hotel has been standing empty in Bradford, Pennsylvania for 37 years, and I'm the only person who knows why everyone crosses the street to avoid it. What I found inside that building changed everything I thought I knew about fear, darkness, and the things that wait in abandoned places for someone stupid enough to enter. My name is Tom Garrett. I am a paranormal investigator, 43 years old. I've spent 2 decades exploring haunted locations across America, debunking most of them. Creaky floors, bad wiring, overactive imaginations. 90% of hauntings have rational explanations. But the Winchester Hotel belongs to that terrifying 10%. The places where something genuinely wrong has taken root. I arrived in Bradford on a gray October morning. Population 8,000 and shrinking. The kind of Pennsylvania town where the factory closed 20 years ago and nothing replaced it. But Bradford had something unique. A building so avoided that people had literally rerouted traffic patterns to keep from driving past it. The Winchester Hotel stood on Elm Street, 7 stories of Victorian architecture from 1892. Beautiful craftsmanship, ornate stonework, massive windows. It should have been a landmark, a source of pride. Instead, it was treated like a wound the town refused to acknowledge. I researched the history. The hotel closed abruptly in 1988. No explanation in the public records. Just locked doors overnight and everyone gone. The strange part was the pattern before that. Every 10 years, like clockwork, the Winchester experienced mass departures. Guests and staff would leave suddenly. Always in October. Always without explanation. 1892, 1902, 1912. The pattern held for nearly a century until the building finally closed for good. I spent my first day in Bradford interviewing locals. Nobody would talk about the Winchester. They'd change the subject, make excuses, leave. One elderly man, probably 75, actually crossed himself when I mentioned the name. That is when I knew we found something real, something terrifying. I approached the building at dusk. The smart move would have been waiting for daylight, but something pulled me forward. A feeling I learned to trust over years of investigation. The building wanted me inside. It was waiting. The exterior was deteriorating but still imposing. Every window was dark, not just because the interior was unlit. The darkness behind that glass seemed absolute, dense, like looking into deep water at midnight. The front entrance was chained. I walked around back and found a service door hanging loose. The lock had been forced. Recent damage. Someone else had been inside. Recently. The door opened with a sound like tearing fabric. Cold air rushed out. Not just cold, freezing. My breath immediately turned to fog. I clicked on my flashlight and stepped into the darkness. The service corridor was narrow. Wallpaper hung in strips. Ceiling tiles had collapsed. Water damage everywhere. Standard abandoned building decay. But the temperature was wrong. It was 50 degrees outside. Inside felt like 20. My equipment confirmed it. 18 degrees in the hallway. Impossible without refrigeration. I moved deeper inside. The corridor opened into a kitchen. Industrial stoves and ovens covered in rust. Counters collapsed under their own weight. But on one counter, I saw something that made my blood freeze colder than the air around me. A coffee cup. Clean. No dust. Still half full. The liquid inside was warm. I touched it. Freshly made. Someone had been here minutes ago. Was possibly still here. I called out. Asked if anyone was present. My voice died in the cold air. No echo. No response. Just that horrible, oppressive silence that makes your ears ring. I continued through the kitchen into the main lobby. And that is when I understood why people avoided this place. The lobby was massive. 2-story ceiling. Grand staircase. Marble floors. Chandelier hanging dark overhead. But the space felt wrong. The proportions didn't match the exterior. The room was too large. Too tall. Like the building was bigger on the inside than outside. And the shadows. God, the shadows. They weren't in the right places. Light from my flashlight should have pushed them back, should have revealed corners and walls. Instead, the shadows stayed where they were, solid, unmovable, like they existed independent of any light source. I heard something then. From above, footsteps. Slow, steady, walking across the second floor. I aimed my flashlight up. Saw nothing, but the footsteps continued, crossing from left to right, then stopping directly above me. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but I had come too far. Investigated too many false alarms to run from sounds that probably had mundane explanations. Probably. I climbed the grand staircase. Each step creaked under my weight. The sound echoed through the empty building, or should have, but the creaking stopped the moment my foot left each step. Like the building was swallowing the sound, eating it. The second-floor hallway stretched impossibly long. Doors lined both sides, room after room after room. More than should fit in the building, its footprint. I counted them as I walked. 20 doors, then 30, then 40. The hallway kept going, kept extending. And behind me, when I looked back, the staircase was gone. Just more hallway, more doors. The fear hit me then. Real fear, primal. I was lost inside geometry that shouldn't exist. Inside spaces that violated basic physics. The Winchester Hotel was more than abandoned. It was infected with something that warped reality itself. I tried the first door. Locked. Second door. Same. The third door opened. Inside was a hotel room. Perfectly preserved. Bed made. Curtains drawn. A suitcase on the luggage rack. I checked the tags. The name read James Whitmore. The date read October 15th, 1978. 47 years ago. But the room looked like it had been prepared yesterday. No dust. No decay. Time had stopped in this room. Or was moving differently. Operating under rules I didn't understand. I opened the suitcase. Clothes from the 70s. Toiletries. A wallet with cash and ID confirming the name. And underneath everything, a journal. I opened it. The entries were disturbing. James Whitmore had checked in for a business trip. The first few pages were normal. Complaints about the food. Notes about meetings. But then the tone changed. He wrote about hearing footsteps in the hallways at night. About shadows that moved wrong. About other guests who didn't seem quite human. The final entry, dated October 19th, said he was going to check out early. Said the hotel felt alive. Said he could hear it breathing at night. The entry ended mid-sentence. The pen had trailed off the page like he'd been interrupted. Or taken. I left the room. Continued down the impossible hallway. More doors. I opened another. Another perfectly preserved room from another decade. 1956, according to the belongings inside. Another journal. Another guest who planned to leave early but apparently never made it out. A third room. 1924. Same pattern. Same abrupt ending to their story. The Winchester didn't just trap people. It collected them. Preserved them in these rooms like insects in amber. And they were still here. Somewhere. I could feel them. Feel their presence pressing against reality from the other side of some invisible membrane. The temperature dropped further. My fingers were going numb. Ice was forming on the walls, spreading in patterns that looked almost like writing. I took photos. Later, when I enlarged them, the ice spelled words. Turn back. Too late. Welcome home. I found the staircase again. Or a staircase. I climbed to the third floor. Fourth. Fifth. Each level was colder than the last. Each had that impossible hallway. Those preserved rooms. Those journals documenting fear and confusion and the creeping realization that checkout was no longer an option. On the sixth floor, I found something different. A room with the door already open. Inside, a man sat on the bed. Alive. Real. He looked up when I entered. His eyes were hollow, exhausted beyond measure. He'd been trapped here for 6 days. He was a local teenager who'd broken in on a dare. That was him who forced the back door, who made the coffee in the kitchen trying to stay warm. He'd been wandering these hallways ever since, trying every exit, every window. All of them led back inside. Back to another hallway, another floor, another room. The Winchester Hotel didn't have exits anymore, only entrances. It brought people in and rearranged itself to keep them, fed on them somehow, on their fear, their desperation, their slow descent into madness. We tried together to escape, tried every door, every staircase, every window. Hours passed, or what felt like hours. Time worked strangely here. My watch had stopped. My phone was dead. The teenager said he'd been here 6 days, but his beard growth suggested weeks. Maybe months. On the 7th floor, we found them. The others, the collected. Dozens of people in dozens of rooms. Some recent, some ancient. A woman in a flapper dress from the 1920s. A man in a zoot suit from the 40s. All of them still aware. Still conscious, but changed, faded, like copies of themselves. They didn't speak. Just stared at us with empty eyes. Eyes that had seen too much. Been trapped too long. They stopped trying to escape. Stopped trying to understand. They just existed now. Waiting. Always waiting. The building shuddered. The walls shifted. I felt the Winchester responding to our presence. Adapting. It was intelligent. Hungry. It had been feeding for over a century. Growing stronger with each person it trapped. Each soul it collected. The teenager grabbed my arm. Pointed to a window. This one was different. Newer. The glass was clear instead of dark. Through it, I could see the street. Real Bradford. Dawn was breaking outside. We'd been inside all night without realizing it. He ran to the window. I screamed for him to stop, but he was already moving. He hit the glass hard. It shattered, and he fell through. Not outside, through, into another room, 1 floor down. The fall should have broken bones. Should have killed him, but the Winchester caught him. Kept him, like it kept everyone. I heard him screaming below me. Then silence. The building had claimed him fully now. He'd be in one of those rooms, perfectly preserved, waiting for someone to read his story decades from now. I ran, picked a direction and just ran. Through hallways, downstairs, through rooms. The building fought me, rearranged itself, created loops and dead ends. But I kept moving, kept fighting. And then I was falling, really falling, down the main staircase. I somehow found it. I hit the lobby floor hard. Pain exploded through my ribs. But I was in the lobby, near the entrance, near freedom. I crawled, couldn't stand, crawled across that marble floor toward the front doors. Behind me, I heard them coming. The collected, the trapped, all of them, walking down those stairs, coming for me. They wanted me to stay, wanted me to be part of the collection. My hand found the door. I pulled. It didn't budge. Locked, chained from outside. I was trapped. The Winchester had won. But then I remembered. The back entrance. The forced service door. I turned, crawled in that direction. The collected were close now. I could smell them. Decay and age and desperation. I reached the kitchen, saw the hallway. Saw that door still hanging open. Saw real sunlight beyond it. I lunged forward, threw myself through that opening. Felt cold hands grab for me. Miss. And then I was outside. On the ground. In the alley. In the real world. I crawled to the street. Flagged down a car. The driver looked at me like I was insane. Asked if I needed an ambulance. I just told him to drive. Get away from the Winchester. Far away. Later, the police found my equipment inside. But no teenager. No trace anyone else had been there. They thought he had some kind of breakdown. Maybe I did. Maybe the whole thing was a nightmare. But I don't think so. Because the Winchester Hotel still stands in Bradford. Still avoided. Still waiting. And sometimes at night, people report seeing lights in the windows. Figures moving in the dark. They hear sounds, footsteps, voices. The collected are still there. Growing. Adding to their numbers whenever someone is foolish enough or unlucky enough to go inside. The building is patient. It's been feeding for over a century. It can wait another century. Another 1,000 years. Stay away from abandoned buildings that everyone avoids. There's always a reason. Always something the locals know but one, he say. The Winchester taught me that some places aren't hunted. They re-alive. And they re-hungry. And once you go inside, leaving becomes the one thing they'll spend eternity trying to do.